Taming the Csdm. What the heck is all that about? Today I'm going to talk to you about a few of the issues with the Csdm. The first one I want to talk to you about is the amount of overhead involved with it. And there are things we can do to reduce that overhead, and we're going to take a look at that today. One example anyway. The second thing I want to talk and use as a theme as I go throughout the presentation is the perception about what goes into delivering a digital service. A big spoiler here, you're not 90% done because you have a form on a website. And I think that's a lot of the perception that we're fighting with the work that we're putting into this modeling piece is, hey, I got the form up, I got most of this done. It's kind of a pay me now or pay me later thing. If you're not properly managing that service, you're going to end up with this pile of technical debt, and you're not really going to have a clear way to go ahead and deliver that service and an improvement on that service on an ongoing basis. Last time we did basically a crash course on the Csdm. Now, if you look at everything here in 7 through 12, what we're looking at is a relatively static area, because once we develop that, we want to reuse it for other services. In our case, it's public services. We want to add more of them as we go. What changes is that number 3 through 6 in the green area, and number 8 and number 13. Those are the things that we have to keep adding as we deliver more services. What if we could automate numbers 3 through 6, number 8, and number 13? In other words, we make it so that overhead goes away that we talked about earlier. You don't have to build it. What you do is you build your catalog, and the Csdm part just appears. An automation. Each time a new public form is added, an entire business model just appears for service owners. That's what I'm calling taming the Csdm. In Santa Monica, we developed 62 services with the Santa Monica team. We don't want to go ahead and do all of those steps, that 3 through 6, and then the 8 and 13, over and over and over again, 62 times. What we want to be able to do is very quickly deploy these services and again have that business model on the back end built for us. That's what we're going to talk about today. We have an existing service catalog, and we talked a little bit about that when we went through the portal in the beginning. It's called the Public Service Catalog. There's a category in that catalog called Services. There's a category Child, which is called Non-Emergency Services. And then in that we have one example catalog item right now. So the premise that we're looking at here is, how do we now do 3 through 6, number 8, and number 13? What we want to do now is we want to look at how do we create a corresponding service catalog or service portfolio that corresponds to our service catalog. So the use case here is that we want to mimic the business side, the business structure. We want to mimic what we're doing on the public facing structure. This isn't for everybody. You're not always going to want to structure that service portfolio like that because there might be different owners at the business level. But our use case today is we're going to go ahead and automate this creation. With that, I'm going to jump over to the demo and we'll take a look at how this automation happens. Where I'm going to start today is with our GitHub repository, similar to the way that we started other presentations. If you're watching this video right now, one of the ways that you might have found the video is by going into the Taming the Common Service Data Model section of our GitHub repository. When I go ahead and open this, it should say complete by the time you watch the video, because I'm going to set it complete. This is my last step. But what we're going to do today is we're going to go through a little bit of setup, and there's not really a lot of setup to do on this one because it's all included in your GitHub updates. But what we do have to do here is we have to make sure that a table's public. If you go here and you go to tables, and we're going to go in and under system definition there's a tables. Make sure you don't click on remote tables, but tables. And what we're going to do is we're going to have to make one table public. Right? And the one that we want to make public is not available for subscribers. So if I put my search in my label, not available for subscribers, I should find that table in there. Now, if you're in an older instance, this might already be set up for you, but I noticed in some of the newer instances, if you go under Application Access and underneath Application Access, some of these aren't checked. Now, we need to be able to write to this table for the process that I'm going to show you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over into my global scope, and that should get me so that I can make these updates, and I'm going to save the changes to this table. Just for a little bit of background, what this table does is this is the table that associates your catalog item with your service offerings in the portfolio. And so I'm going to go ahead and update that record. And as I said, a lot of you might have that done already because in older versions, the default settings were to allow it to be updated from any scope that you wanted to. And that's really the only setup you have to do, is make sure that that's set up and it's public. If that doesn't work, your workflow that I'm going to jump into next is not going to function properly. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into our flow designer. And these are meant to be like little lessons on certain parts of ServiceNow as we go to, but it's with respect to the common service data model. So underneath process automation, you'll see a link to flow designer, and that'll launch you into a new interface that we can go ahead and use the flow designer. I'm going to give us a little more real estate here. Now the flow that you downloaded, if you downloaded the most recent set off of GitHub, will have a public service data modeler flow in there. What this flow does is it's going to go ahead and every time I update a record in my catalog, it's going to look up that catalog record and it's going to fire this workflow. And what the workflow is going to do, it's going to look up different definitions inside my service portfolio. So in this case, it's going to get the taxonomy layer where it wants to create the categorization. And then after it gets the taxonomy layer, it's going to look up the application service we're using. So you remember all the things on the left-hand side of our picture? It's actually getting those static items that we talked about earlier. And then what it's going to do, it's going to launch into a spoke that I created for our public service portfolio. And it's going to do some specific work inside here. Now I don't want to go into details today, but I took some extra care inside this spoke called Public Service Catalog to Service Portfolio to do as much documentation as I could. So if you go in and look at this actual action that I created, which is a spoke, it's taking inputs from the workflow that kicked off, and it's running this script. And this script is doing a lot of different things to build out that other side, right? This is where the magic of that automation happens. We're workflowing it. We're not building this manually every single time. In the case of Santa Monica, we would have to do this 62 times if we didn't have a way to automate it. So this automation will go through and it'll actually build that taxonomy on the portfolio side. Now what I want to do is I want to take you through just a little bit more of an education on Flow Designer. And what I have down here is I have in the explanation that after you watch the setup video, go ahead and try it. So what I'm suggesting here is that you go back and we want to go into the report a street layout, the public forum. So if I go back here and I go to my public folder that I'm creating and I go to public forums, you'll see that there's one in here now called Report Street Layout. If we open Report Street Layout, a real easy way to create a second catalog item would be to make a copy of Report Street Layout. And just to save time, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and let's change it back to our spoke, or our proper scope, the public service scope. And now what we can do is we can say, okay, let's go ahead and create a copy of this item. Now, this copy in itself should kick off our workflow because we have a new catalog item called copy of Report Street Layout. If I go into Flow Designer and I click on executions, what I should see now is that there is a recent execution. And that one is right here at 1851. And if I open that execution up, it'll say, what did I do? Well, I looked up the record, right? So in here, I could actually see the records. So if you want to take some extra time, go through one of these traces and understand the records that are coming in to go ahead and build these things out. And so this is executing or automating all those steps I talked about in the beginning. What happened on the back side of this, if I go back and I go into the result and I look at our public service portfolio, and again, this is not the catalog side. We'll look at the catalog in a minute, but this is the service portfolio side. So underneath services, if I open that up, I should see that I have one different service under that node called non-emergency issues. And if I open non-emergency issues, what I should now see is instead of one, report street light out, I have two services under there. Now, we don't really want to call it copy of report street light out. So what I want to do is I want to actually create a new categorization for this. Now, if you wanted to try that, what I can do is I can go back to that record. Right, so I'll go back to my new record producer called copy of report street light out. And I can rename this. So let's just call this, I was just talking to somebody the other day, and we were doing a student appeal form. So I can do a student appeal, and this is the new service that I'm creating, a student appeal service. And once I go ahead and save that record, I also don't want to have my student appeal service end up in that same category. What I can do down here is, if I go down, this is my categorization. So right now you'll see that I have this category is in the non-emergency services, but I wanted it in a new category. I don't want it in that category. What I'll do before I create the new service is I want to go ahead and delete this, because you don't want to have this in more than one category. We're going to keep it simple for now. So we're going to get rid of non-emergency services, and we're going to go ahead and create a new category, and that new category we'll do it something for students instead of non-emergency services. So the category, the bottom level category that I want to create first will be, I'll call it legal. Right, so this is a legal appeal that the student's doing. It's going to be a category inside our public service catalog. So what I'm doing now is I'm creating the catalog side, and I'm going to let my workflow create the portfolio side. It's in the public service catalog. So what we want to do is create a new top level category, and I'll call this one student services. And this is also going to go in our same public service catalog. So now I'm creating that catalog taxonomy. And if I go ahead and submit this, it should drop it right into as my parent here. So now I have student services legal, and I'll go ahead and submit that. So now I have my new name and I have my new categorization. So what I should see is, if I go into my public service portal, I should see that I have that new form set up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate my browser here. And if you remember in the beginning, we went to our pub. So if I go into our public service portal, I should now see that I have a new category in there and a new subcategory, and also our new public service. So now I have student services, I have legal, and underneath legal you'll see I have our student appeal form in there. I didn't change any of the details yet, but I'm just showing you the structure today. What I want to do is I want to go back into my service portfolio now. So if we go back into my public service template and I look at my public service portfolio, I now have a student services taxonomy node, which was created by my workflow. I have a legal service underneath that. And then if I open up the legal service, you'll see that I have a student appeal offering. That's basically an example of taming the CSDM, because we workflowed the whole creation. It's not something you have to go and, again, duplicate 62 times like we did. So hopefully this really pulls down that objection of it's too much work to do that. It's too much work to create all those connections. Just look for these repeatable use cases. If you're doing a bunch of websites, every website can be the same if you're using the same. Let's say I'm using Drupal for my websites. You don't have to go ahead and deliver each one of these painstakingly, making all these manual connections. You have a workflow engine. You're working on ServiceNow. Hopefully this was helpful to everybody, and I look forward to continuing on this series of videos that should help you through this journey. Thank you very much.